Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a brisk March morning here in suburban Chicago. The sun is shining, but the wind is a little icy. My cheeks are chilled. And spring is not quite in the air yet. It actually feels like late fall because the snow is mostly gone. Feels like the beginning of December right now, actually. But chilly, very chilly. I hope that your day is going well. I had a lovely game night last night at Toggle Gaming in Palatine, Illinois. I got a chance to play Newton, which I'll talk about at some point, I'm sure. Maybe I'd like to get another play in before I do, though who knows when that will happen, and another play of Reykholt, which I already talked about. So it was a fun night all around. I'm also pleased to mention that we've now been approved for the Board Game Geek entry for a game we're working on that should be on Kickstarter next January. Now, if things go well, between now and then we'll have another Kickstarter happen. But we are now scheduled to have a game go on Kickstarter next January called Hindsight 2020. It's a game about running a time-traveling machine and using it to stop the apocalypse. We've been playtesting it quite a bit lately, and it's a lot of fun. You'll hear more about it in the coming months, and obviously next January, but I just wanted to mention that because it's always exciting to get a little thing saying message approved. At some point I'll talk about Board Game Geek's weird approval system, but not today. Today I wanted to talk about something that came to mind based on a couple different announcements that have come out in the last few weeks. The three things that I'm thinking of, three or four? Three things that I'm thinking of are, first, Fantasy Flight announced the next standalone board game in their Star Wars line. Now, I haven't been in the miniatures games. I don't have Imperial Assault. I never bought the Star Wars ship games, X-Wing or Armada. But I really like Star Wars Rebellion. It's in my top 10. I think it was number 5 last time I did that list. And I have enjoyed their other Star Wars games. I think they do well with that property. So I was very excited to hear they have a new Star Wars game coming out called The Outer Rim Adventures or something like that, and it sounds like it's a pick up and deliver style game where you play mercenaries on the outer edge of the solar system, somebody like Han Solo running around doing space stuff. I don't know a lot more about it than that, but I am really excited for it. I haven't decided if I'm going to pre-order or not, but I'm looking forward to the reviews on that. So that's one thing that came across the transom. Another thing that I was middling excited about, there was a Kickstarter from Renegade Studios for a new game by Mike Elliott, who's somebody whose games I haven't played, but is a person with a strong design background, called The Terror Below. And it's a game about sand-crawling worms trying to eat people. It's basically totally not the Tremors game. So they themed the game heavily around Tremors, but they didn't actually get the license, or maybe they couldn't get the license. But that's what the game is. If you haven't seen Tremors, it's a horror movie about worms crawling under the ground, eating people. It's pretty dumb, but very fun. And then the third thing that came up across my transom that brought up this subject today was that USAopoly has announced an expansion to the Buffy the Vampire Slayer game, Friends and Frenemies, and it looks like that will be an interesting addition to the game. The Buffy the Vampire Slayer board game is one I've been wrestling with a bit because I have had it for a while and I haven't been able to get it to the table, and it's hard to evaluate whether I should get the expansion or not if I haven't been able to play the base game. But the collector in me really wants to have everything for the game, but I need to know if I like the game first. If I don't like the game, we ought to get rid of it. So, those three things. Can you see a common unity in them? It's nostalgia for an IP. That's my subject for today. IP meaning intellectual property, or like a creative world that's been established already. If you think of Star Wars, would be an intellectual property, an IP, a creative world. So I want to talk a little bit about why are these exciting, and my experience with games of this ilk. So intellectual property games, or games built around a license, around a previous set of stories, are really exciting because they tap into a pleasure we already have. Right? When we go to play a Star Wars game, part of the reason we're going to play it is that we already appreciate the stories being told in the Star Wars world. And like any comedian who's had a warm-up act go on before them, this gives you a leg up as a creator with your audience because they are already on board with the thing you're doing. However, it also risks the backlash of people who feel like the thing that you did is not the thing that they wanted you to do. So I want to talk about pleasure and welcome the enthusiasm, but also nostalgia. So I see pleasure and enthusiasm in previously created creative texts, which I'm going to call IPs for now, just for lack of having to say all of that. Although I don't like the use of legal language to describe these creative worlds. I'm going to call them creative worlds. So our love for creative worlds and our enthusiasm for creative worlds helps bind us together with other people who enjoy those things, right? We call those fandoms. Groups, like a kingdom of people who like a thing, they're a fandom. A group of people who like a thing and share with each other their pleasure in that thing. This has been part of internet culture as long as internet culture has existed, right? It was the thing that people were doing with message boards right away, is figuring out how to make computers write in Elvish, for example. And so the idea that we could have a board game, a social experience, built around a creative world we're already interested in, is an interesting one to me. And it's not surprising that we find that really fun. We have this thing we enjoy, and we want to enjoy it more. So when we hear about a board game that's tied into that thing we enjoy already, yeah, we're going to be on board. This is why video game companies make video game tie-ins. This is why when we were kids, there was always a corny board game built around whatever thing we were watching. I have in my collection, in the dusty, hey, look at this, isn't it amusing that this exists section of my collection, I have a Murder, She Wrote board game, and I have a Columbo board game. I don't have those to play them. I have those because it's amusing that they exist. So that's part of it, is this, we have this enthusiasm for things. But at the same time, we also have nostalgia. And I would argue, and I'm echoing smarter people than me here, nostalgia is a dangerous impulse, right? On one hand, nostalgia is that feeling we have when we think about a pleasurable moment from our childhood, right? When we remember, like for me, Christmas at my mother's house is going to be full of memories of potpourri and presents and general warm family feelings and nice fires, and all of these things evoke in me memories of positive experiences. And I don't remember the negative experiences much unless I actively think about it. And so we get a altered view of the past, right? We look at the past through rose-colored glasses, as one metaphor. We see the past as a place that's great, right? And this is an impulse that threads through our culture entirely, right? When we look at times of the past, we often talk about them as better. This is in many ways the conservative impulse, that we see a sort of fractious America today, and we look at America of the 1940s and we say, look how we all unified against a common enemy and things were great. Or we look at the 1950s and we say, look at how people shared the wealth in the post-war industrial era and so on. Right? These are views of the past that are shaped around positive experiences. And this is the experience we have with a lot of creative worlds. We remember the positive experience we had with that text, and it shapes our view of what the new thing should be. The reason nostalgia is problematic is it doesn't allow for change. Nostalgia inherently built on the idea that it should be the same as it was, right? This is the impulse that, and I guess the fourth thing that prompted this discussion was a really interesting discussion in the Rahdo Runs Through forums about The Last Jedi, where Rahdo wrote a very, very long defense of the movie, and there's been some interesting back and forth about why the movie is or isn't it good, and I don't really want to talk about that, but one of Rahdo's main points is that he thinks the movie is good because it changed what the Star Wars stories are supposed to do. It's not just the same old Star Wars story. And I would say that a significant portion of the pushback is, they didn't follow the rules you're supposed to follow when you're telling a Star Wars story. That at the core, nostalgia is in dispute there. So when we engage with a licensed game, we have on one hand nostalgia pushing us to think that the experience we have with the game should evoke the same feelings, memories, excitements that our engagement with the original text evoked. And then we also have enthusiasm, where we say we love the thing that they're doing with that text and we can't wait to dive deeper into that creative world. So both of those are at play when you engage with intellectual property. I would say the thing that doesn't fit into the normal conversation there, or in the conversation we have about creative world games, is the fact of the abstraction. That a creative board game is at its heart an abstraction of things. That you are taking a variety of different kind of mechanisms and making them in various ways abstract in order to allow the players to manipulate the world. And I would say the more abstracted or disconnected from the narrative being told the things get, the harder it is to actually have a story built into the gameplay. So I guess having kind of set that up, I wanted to reflect a little bit on my experience with a few creative world games that have come out and the places where I think they succeeded and places where they came up short. So point to a couple come up shorts. So one of them, I have the Goonies game. This is a licensed game that was made by Matt Riddle and Ben Pinchback, and it's focused on a pandemic-style accumulation of dramatic elements and the spending of resources. The unique thing is that there's no turns. Everybody acts together, which actually sort of embodies the notion of what the Goonies are. But the Goonies felt like it was about danger and adventure, and the kind of contained experience of the game doesn't feel like that adventure. It feels like an abstraction to the point where you're trying to manage these crises, and it doesn't sort of embody the experience. Like the entire experience of the Goonies intellectual property comes through the images on the cards. And not to pick on these two designers, but I think the Back to the Future game from IDW, which is a really good game as a way of telling a Back to the Future story, the theme feels really disconnected from the story being told. The time travel mechanism is a abstraction for solving this puzzle, but it never feels like the time travel part matters. I mean, if you think about the game Loop Inc., which is not set around an established creative world, that one feels like the time travel element is baked into how you play. The Back to the Future game feels like you're solving a puzzle, and one of the things you can do is play a Biff card. It doesn't really feel like you are telling a Back to the Future story. So maybe for me, that's the crux of it. Does it feel like I'm telling the story that evokes those same excitements? When I talk about Star Wars Rebellion, part of what's fun about that is it feels like a narration of A New Hope through the Return of the Jedi, of that era in the Star Wars story world. That when you take actions, those actions are named and they engage in a way that taking them tells a story. And some of it is really very specific. If your opponent captures Obi-Wan, you can play the Obi-Wan sacrifice card and so on. But there's a variety of these kinds of things that happen that make you feel, they tap into that enthusiasm and frankly the nostalgia as well, but also growing in just the right ways. So, the Terror Below game, I decided not to back it because I was very disappointed in Shark Island, which is fun, but not nearly as fun as I wanted it to be. Coming up this year, I have the Hellboy Kickstarter coming. I'm really hoping that will be fun. I'm trying not to get too enthusiastic about it, but I like that creative world so much that I can't help but get excited. And then I really got to play this Buffy the Vampire Slayer game and see if it works on the same level or the same kind of enthusiasm that I'm already used to with that property, so that I can then decide whether I want to get the expansion or not. Well, I don't feel like I had a good button for the end of this episode. I feel like I've arrived home and I don't know what to say that finishes the conversation, except to ask, what experience with Creative World games have you had? Have you had things that worked really well where you're very excited with the way they turned out? Have you had moments of disappointment where you got a game and it's just not as good as you were hoping it would be? Tell me, pop over to our guild, Board Game Geek Guild 3269, and let me know your experiences with Creative World games. And we'll continue the conversation there. Thanks for taking a walk with me today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.